Hey, what's up, everyone, and welcome back to Explain It to Me and our last episode for Loki Season 1. Just Season 1.
Yeah, get another season.
Which I'm glad about, and we'll talk about why. But please welcome to the show for the third time for Loki alone. Ken Plume, thanks so much for being our resident Loki expert.
I've been a variant each time. This is actually a different Ken. You're welcome.
Now I'm going to have to go back through your backgrounds and see what's changed. And what's
find out which one of us is Ken the Conqueror.
What would variant Kens fight about if a bunch of you met in a room?
Oh, geez. What would we fight about? Probably whatever the dinner plans were. We'd all have opinions. Well, maybe what happened in the last episode of Loki? We'd probably fight about that.
Yeah, what I wonder what would drive you to start the TVA, basically. We're like, this is the one thing that has to...
A love of beige.
You're just a khaki castle.
Just a khaki castle. Ken's khaki castle.
But could you kiss yourself? We've immediately gone off the rails.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we're going by Loki rules, then sure.
Well, let's just dive into the episode, and we'll talk about how we liked the series as a whole. But what did everyone think of the finale? I'll start with Ashton because you texted me some exciting things.
Yeah, I thought it was great. Like you mentioned right before the show last week, we had finally at the last minute thought, okay, it's probably not Kang behind everything because they waited so long to introduce him, and it was like I mean. I have no complaints about that personally. It just made me it made it unpredictable. So that was great. It's just one of those things where the only reason that I thought that they wouldn't do it in the last episode was just because of the format of TV shows. And if you're going to have a character written into the plot and pay an actor and all that, you usually wouldn't only have them in the last episode, but Disney's going to do whatever they want to do. And I thought it made for a great story.
You should have gone all in on Mephisto last week. That was really awesome.
I can't believe we stayed with Mephisto the whole time. I felt like, and it didn't pan out. We were like, oh well. And
the show's worth the build up, and they're gonna reveal him.
Maybe that's why I'm tempering expectations now.
Yeah, last week Alyssa had a very good argument for why it wouldn't be Kang, and I was like, you know what, you're probably right. And then it is Kang. But I still think that because we were talking about how it should be about Loki fighting himself, and they still found a way to do that with the climax of the episode. So I think it worked out. Molly, what did you think?
I liked it. I didn't like it as much as the last two Marvel shows, I will say that. But knowing that there's going to be a season 2, I was like, okay, because I was like, they got a lot to wrap up here in this season finale, unless there's a season 2. So just knowing that there's going to be more of this show makes me feel better about how it ended. But I was pretty confused. I mean, I know we've talked about who Kang is, and I'm excited to see where they go with him and that story. But I couldn't help but think the whole time, what is just a normal, everyday person who doesn't know anything about Marvel? What do they think about this show?
I definitely think it helped us, Molly and I, the whole time, because when he appeared, we were like, and the second he said, "Some have called me a conqueror," I was like, "Oh, it is Kang." Okay, that it helped having that knowledge. So thank you, Ken and Ashton.
I mean, I definitely think this show veered more into the territory of comic fans will appreciate this because they're comic book fans than some of the previous shows have. So yeah, I definitely had that thought too, where I was like, I wonder what this, because I can't really.
This was the canary in the coal mine. This was them seeing how far the audience would follow them into comic lore and tropes and being out there. Because you can't get more out there than the multiverse and different versions of a character you've been following for ages.
Yeah,
Star Wars seems to do similar stuff where they'll go much riskier and much weirder in the comics and in the books than they will in the movies and the TV series. So I could see this being like, okay, this isn't a movie. It's a series that people have been invested in for 6 weeks. So they can be a little riskier with it. And you're moving people down that funnel where like probably more diehard comic book fans are going to seek out the TV series than just go watch the movies. So I think it makes sense to try it out.
But I wonder if we're wrong to expect there to be any conclusions to anything in these series. Because if we're looking at these as bridging stories between cinematic tentpoles, that means the resolution of the Kang story or the TVA story might not be until Ant-Man and Quantumania. These may
or
just
Loki season 2.
I don't think we're going to get resolution in season 2. I think we might see what moves along the ball with Loki as a character, but I think the bigger picture stuff that was just introduced in this, I don't think we're going to get resolved at the end. Like the stuff, what's going on with the timeline and what's Kang's ultimate motive and what's going to be his grand plan. I don't think we're going to get that resolution in these shows.
Yeah, like I think that season 2, it's likely that we'll get some kind of conclusion for Loki, and they'll probably tie a bow on the TVA stuff. But as far as Kang goes, I think that's going to be stuff that's going to be movie. It's going to have to be dealt with in the actual movies.
I agree with that. I think that Loki should get resolution within the show, and it should be more about him and Sylvie. And that was where I was like, oh, if they didn't slap Loki will return in season 2 on this, I don't think I would have liked this finale all that much. It was just a big exposition dump, which I was intrigued by. And then there was a bit of a fight at the end, and then it has the whole cliffhanger of like, he's not even back at the right TVA. He's at another TVA, and Mobius doesn't know him. And that was just a kick in the gut. So
yeah, that was heartbreaking.
It would have been like if somebody knew nothing about Lord of the Rings and they got to the end of Fellowship of the Ring in the theater. Like,
I went to see Lord of the Rings with someone who didn't know the kind of trilogy that it was and didn't know that another movie was coming out the next year. So I've seen that reaction.
Yeah, I mean, if these shows are meant to just bridge a lot of the gaps for the movies and like the bigger picture kind of story, I'm fine with that too. But I don't know. I feel like they should make an official statement just telling people that like it's okay, like just make sure you watch the movies too, or else you might be lost.
Or just have to watch everything. You can't miss a thing.
Yeah.
Well, and in the comics they do that a lot too, where it's like, the individual comic book runs will often have like sort of a conclusion for the character that's the title character, usually, sometimes not even that, and they'll lead into the big comic book events, and you have to go read the comic book event thing to actually find out what happens next. But a lot of the time they will have a little note at the end that'll be like, we'll return to this story in such and such event.
Mobius died on the way back to his home planet.
No. I hope he was on a jet ski at least.
Well, I mean,
I think it makes perfect
on the Star
sense.
Wars side. I mean, the comics are with War of the Bounty Hunters are certainly doing that now,
Mm-hmm.
And the High Republic is weaving through those book titles, where you have the essential core books, but you get things fleshed out.
It's a tough balancing act to be like, okay, this is a connected story, but it also stands alone. Like looking at more so the middle grade books, I think, for the High Republic, I feel like they tell a pretty self-contained story. It's the larger novels that are telling the ongoing thing with the cliffhangers and stuff. But yeah, it's hard when you're mixing TV series and movies, and especially with the MCU, which has kind of like this one timeline going forward. Star Wars has the luxury of bouncing all over the place. Not everything is going to feed into the next thing. So yeah, the MCU trying to be like, we're telling a story about Loki where he should have an emotional arc, but we're also, introducing you to Kang, who is going to at least be in Quantumania. But maybe, is it possible? I asked this before, but I want to revisit the question. Could he be the next Thanos?
I think that it's less that Kang could be the next Thanos per se, and more that the multiverse war that could happen because of Kang could be the next like Infinity War event. Because then you're dealing with like a bunch of different Kangs. It's not like there's one singular Kang that's causing all of this, and you have to deal with him. It makes it even harder because you can't just deal with him.
Yeah. Okay.
You know?
That I like that.
But it
that
also
it's
makes
more
it
the event.
potentially easier to bring in the X-Men or the Fantastic Four when you don't have to go, where have they been this whole time in the MCU? They were in a different version of Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And now, you know, if they're looking at what tends to happen with these big events, and including in recent Marvel history, you just sort of, at the end of all this, start collapsing all these realities down and cherry picking the elements that are going to be in your new condensed prime timeline that now has the Fantastic Four in it, that now has X-Men in it, that didn't before.
Yeah.
So this is giving them an opportunity to rewrite the history of the MCU to this point.
Is Kang the 1,000 duck-sized horses versus Thanos 1 horse-sized duck?
Exactly.
Analogy.
Exactly that.
I did see a lot of people talking, like getting really excited about the fact that like, oh, this is our gateway to having X-Men, and that is really exciting. And I love the idea of the multiverse bringing in all these new stories. And yeah, I'm excited for X-Men to show up.
Do you guys like that as a storytelling device, or does it feel a little bit, I don't know, easy?
Well, I'm biased because I was a huge fan of the Marvel Ultimates run, which was basically exactly what we're talking about right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was another Marvel universe that was like a parallel universe where the characters they had the same characters, but they were all different in various ways.
Or you got the press reset buttons, like, oh, we want Spider-Man back in high school. Well, now this Spider-Man is back in high school.
Exactly. And then you had like situations like, it's like, what if Reed Richards was a bad guy? You know, and you get to play with that idea. And, you know, it's just fun. And then eventually the, you know, Ultimates run, for various reasons, they were done with it. And so they ended up having a big multiverse war kind of event, and it went away. But they managed to sort of pick out the characters that were the best parts of the Ultimates universe,
Miles
and
Morales.
keep them. Like Miles Morales. Yeah, he's from that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And so did they get like pulled from their universe into the main universe?
Yes.
Or
yeah, because
So
effectively
they were
what was
integrated
happening
into the timeline.
Okay.
Yeah, because effectively what was happening was the universes were colliding into each other, and then in the process of resolving that, they actually like pulled people from the other universe to help them, and then some of them stayed, basically.
But then it's like they'd always been in the prime timeline or universe.
Yeah.
So they were integrated into, even backwards integrated into the history of that.
Yeah,
Okay.
a lot of that event got immediately followed up by another big, huge event that changed like everything anyway. So,
Because comics.
yeah.
So we might, for the Fantastic Four movie, it might be something where that movie takes place in another timeline, and then eventually it will converge with the timeline that we know, and they'll just stick around. Like the Fantastic Four might be the Avengers of their timeline.
Exactly. Like you might have another version of the Marvel universe where there's New York and they have the Baxter Building instead of the Avengers Tower, and Fantastic Four are solving all these problems. And then
The Baxter Building being their headquarters.
Yeah, that's the Fantastic Four's headquarters. And then like through the course of the movie, maybe they end up getting, or you know, maybe a couple movies they get shifted into the main timeline, and then they get to deal with Iron Man and Thor and all the other characters.
Or they just, you know, disappeared into the multiverse when they launched back in 1961 and haven't been seen since, and reemerge into the current timeline because of the.
Yeah, I mean,
chaos
Fantastic
being
Four
caused.
is a cool one because there's a lot of different ways they could handle it. Yeah, they could just have been missing this whole time.
And they just show up with stretchy arms and a rock
their
band.
Fantastic Four was the cosmic book in the Marvel Universe. You know, if Spider-Man's street level, Fantastic Four was the Journey Beyond the Stars, alternate dimensions sort of book. So the idea that they could have just disappeared from our realm of existence for decades or however long, and then reemerge is perfectly fitting within what those characters were, because they were explorers, adventurers, that kind of team.
Cool.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's neat. Like, I guess at first I was wondering if it would feel a little off to have the X-Men show up, but have it be like, it's not in our timeline though, it's in this other universe. But that does seem cool to kind of the way that we explored Iron Man and then Thor and then Captain America and the Hulk, and then they all come together. It's like we can explore these various timelines with the anticipation of them all clashing and battling in the multiverse war at some point.
Mm-hmm.
If that's what they're going for.
Also, you mentioning Iron Man again reminded me, this is another moment of a long-running conversation we've had every week of, now that Kang's a thing, we also have another character that could end up being in Teen Titans, or not Teen Titans, the Young Avengers.
The Multiverse. They could be in Teen Titans if they want
Young
to be.
Avengers, because a young Kang, because he's a time traveler, so Kang at any point in his life can show up. A young Kang did act as Iron Lad for a while and was on like Young Avengers. So that's another character for the Young Avengers thing that they haven't announced.
I think we'll probably get more sense of what's happening with their Young Avengers plans when we see what happens this year with Hawkeye and Ms. Marvel. Because the fact that those are 2 solo series, I mean, that'll be the first time that a member of the Young Avengers will have a solo series. So where they leave those 2 characters at the end of those series, I think is going to be an indicator as to what their overall plan is. And those are coming up fast.
Mm-hmm.
What did everyone think of Kang? Or I know, Ken, that's not exactly correct, but Molly, what did you think of the character? The He Who Remains, is that what they called him in this?
Yeah, I really liked him. He was kind of like all over the place, and Jonathan Majors just like he had this like small amount of time in this season to just knock it out of the park, and I think he did a really great job.
He ate those scenes up like an apple.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I loved it. I was like, I have no idea where this is going, but I love it. And yeah, I vaguely know about like Immortus being super old, and then that wasn't technically Kang or Kang the Conqueror, so we'll see different versions of him pop up. But I liked it.
I thought it was great. But
It's nice to see him be sort of the most likable version.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
a way to ease us into it.
Yeah, before
I mean,
we
you have some
apparently
kind of
see
contrast.
like the worst side of him.
I think that was my favorite moment from this episode was the moment where Kang was like, we're all villains here. And it sort of does remind you that like, yeah, it's Kang the Conqueror and 2 Lokis that are sitting down in a room having a conversation right now. This is great. But
yeah,
then
he reminds them that like, you guys have killed a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. But then he kind of brings it around to the like, you think I'm bad, wait until you see the other guy sort of moment. And it's like, oh yeah, that is really cool.
If Immortus, or He Who Remains, is responsible for Alioth, imagine how many people Alioth has devoured in that end of time dumping ground that have been pruned and sent there. So there was a lot of death.
Oh yeah, I mean he's still he even called himself a dictator. That
well, his whole grow up Sylvie moment too.
Yeah, I love that. The like hypocrite, murderer. I liked his very just manic all over the place. Sometimes you'd see him sitting in the background, like really watching them fight and being into it. Sometimes he'd be calm, sometimes he'd be intense.
But it made for a character that was believably like ancient and also having spent a lot of time by himself.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I think that really shone through. Go ahead, Molly.
Sorry, I was just going to say the moment that he goes, I don't know what's going to happen from now on. He's just like, it's like he's watching a movie and eating popcorn.
Yeah, I mean, his counting those seconds that he doesn't know about, that I think really sold that character and sort of his, now it's all in your hands. I mean, it's weird how this show has gone from Wizard of Oz then to Willy Wonka at the end.
I loved his last line too. The "see you soon" was very good and ominous.
And the wink.
Yeah.
Well, and also speaking of them seeing him soon, once Loki does show back up in the TVA, I love that the statue of Kang is him in his classic like Kang the Conqueror appearance. Like that's what that costume is. So that kind of is a
Which we
little
got
bit ominous.
in that little sort of malleable nanite presentation history lesson that he gave
Mhm.
of the history of Kang. We got to see that costume. Which do you have the picture that I sent you, Alex, of the
Oh, not. It's on my
Polarized.
phone.
I can zoom in on it. Yes. So basically, in the flashback, just because it was cool enough for me to do it, I did a quick colorization of him in that flashback.
Nice.
Ooh.
Yeah. All the
Cool.
a lot of the comic book villains are purple and green because those were the expensive colors to use in the comic books back in the day.
So
Which is
what
always
makes
really
villains?
fun.
Because they're secondary colors. So
Yeah.
primary colors were reserved for heroes.
Okay.
That's why reds, blues were hero colors. And it was the way that because secondary colors are blend colors. And so they wanted the heroes to pop with the primary colors. And the villains then all got purples and greens.
Yeah. So in
Except for
case you're
Hulk.
wondering
Cool.
why it's like, why are all these villains purple? It's
Except for Hulk,
Yeah,
who was
old
not
school
comic
green.
books.
Hulk was not green originally. Hulk was gray.
Mm.
Well, I want to come back to Kang. I have some more questions, but Brett Baumler, thanks for the super chat, says, I love how this was mostly dialogue and that they presented the characters with an ethical dilemma rather than forcing a big CGI energy blast fight. I completely agree. That's
Yeah.
how most of these stories end, and this one did
Absolutely
not.
fitting for a Loki story, though, right? Wasn't it going to be talking at the end? If it was a Loki
Mhm.
story, it kind of had to be.
He loves to talk.
But yeah, we talked about this with Black Widow the other day about like how it just ends in this really over the top cool fight, but it's like that's how so many of these movies end, and that this one, it reminded me more of something like the most tense moment in The Dark Knight is the two like random boats full of random people deciding whether or not they're going to blow the other one up. Like that's the most intense part of that movie. So I love that they were doing something along those lines instead of just a bunch of fighting.
It was like an
Mhm.
ethical argument version of a Mexican standoff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because fundamentally, all three of them were asking for trust. And all three of them were ones that were not inclined to trust.
Yeah.
Especially
And they're
Sylvie.
all
Others were
villains.
trustworthy. Yeah. So, as far as a finale that this series should have gone to, this seems appropriate.
And Christian Alante also sent in a super chat. Thank you. Hoping the next in-game type event is Secret Wars. And that's another one that they're also starting to build to, right? Because they're going to do a Secret Invasion show.
Well, Secret Wars and Secret Invasion are two different things.
Oh.
Yeah. So Secret Invasion is there's secretly scrolls all over the place, and then you end up with this cosmic, or
Body snatchers. Think
yeah.
of essentially body snatchers.
Right.
Secret Wars is one where like all the multiverses collapse, and then Doctor Doom ends up being god of a new dimension that lasts afterwards, and it's this big cool thing. It's possibly my favorite comic book event that I've ever read. It was really, really cool.
Well,
Doom essentially creates like a patchwork version of all kinds of different elements of all these different collapsing realities.
so
At
okay,
what point
that makes
do you
sense.
think we'll be introduced to a Doctor Doom type character?
I don't know. I mean, Kang is potentially a descendant of Doctor Doom, so who knows?
When does Fantastic Four come out? Like 2023 or 4?
I think it's 23.
Is it 23? Is that one of the unannounced ones as far as what the scheduled date is?
I think it has a year.
TBA.
Not a-
It's still
it's
TBA.
TBA.
I wouldn't be surprised. So right now we have 4 films coming out next year. And then only 2 have been announced for 2023 so far, which is Ant-Man and Guardians.
Mm.
So if they're keeping to the 4 release schedule, that's 2 additional slots they'd have available for 2023.
Do you think
Yeah.
we'll get the third Ant-Man movie or the second season of Loki first?
I think we'll get Loki first.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think people were speculating that they filmed 20 episodes or 12 episodes already, and that they just split it in half.
That would be
Makes
smart.
sense.
I mean,
I'm trying to remember why people said that, but yeah, that makes sense. That this could have been a 12 episode season, but maybe they're just like, let's cut it in half.
Well, and that kind of, I wouldn't be surprised because, like we were talking about earlier, like they saved so much stuff for this last episode. Like we had sets that they were in that we had never seen before, even though a lot of that was probably CGI, but it's still stuff they developed, like scenery that we hadn't seen before at all, and characters that we hadn't seen before at all, and stuff like that they only used for one episode. So if they actually did film 12 episodes, it makes more sense that, well, they developed that because they knew they were using it in like 2 more afterwards.
I wonder if we'll find out next week. I'd be curious because it only involved 3 actors for anything involving He Who Remains. If that, it might have been shot on the volume or a version of the volume. They've been building volumes. And if you're, you're having to finish this show also during COVID, if that might have been something, because that would have been easy to do on the volume, particularly with that backdrop behind him. And
I know someone, because we were discussing the volume in episode 3 or 4, whichever one was the big apocalypse episode, and someone pointed out that they said that I think Thor: Love and Thunder was like the first MCU thing to use the volume. So I don't think they did that, but maybe Thor: Love and Thunder is the first one to use the volume like extensively for its whole production.
Maybe first movie.
Maybe.
Like theatrically released movie versus show. I don't know.
Yeah. And people in the chat were also pointing out that, there's stuff from the trailer that wasn't actually in the show. So that's another, like, maybe that's stuff that's actually from the second season. Either that or they just included footage that they didn't end up using. Which
happens.
I mean, they could,
Yeah, that happens a lot.
Look at the Rogue One trailer. We got another super chat from Brett Baumler, who said, in an interview after the episode, Michael Waldron, the head writer, said Kang is Marvel's new big crossover villain, so he's probably showing up a lot. That makes sense.
And you know what else Michael Waldron is doing? He's the screenwriter on Quantumania, on the next Ant-Man movie.
And he's working on Feige's Star Wars project.
And Kang is a convenient one to use that with because it's not just one Kang, it's a bunch. So, you can actually deal with him in one movie and him still be a problem in another.
And that's a great segue into the question I wanted to come back to. Is Immortus a good representation of Kang's, like what we can expect to see from him in the future? Or is he going to be wildly different every time?
I would say I'm not wildly different. I think all the Kangs will be rather consistent, but Immortus always was portrayed with an edge. As far as Ashton, you remember that he's always a bit of a dick.
Yeah, he's the king of limbo, and he has like a bunch of demon minions and stuff.
And he's also really full of himself. He's still a Kang. There's a massive ego involved. So he's like, I'm the only one who's keeping these things in check. I'm the only one who's responsible for doing this, and so there is a fair amount of ego. But he's the most enlightened. Like he's the one who had therapy. Like the one who got out the other side and went, I worked through my issues. I don't have the anger issues I have anymore. I see I was really bad then, and I need to atone for that and now fix the timeline and keep the timeline safe mainly from me.
He has kind of an element similar to Silver Surfer also, where it's like he works for some bad guys, but a lot of the time he shows up to do the job that they want him to do and decides not to do it because he's not like not as insane as they are, like they send him at one point in the comics to they recognize that Scarlet Witch as a Nexus being is like a big deal and they don't want her to have any kids. And so they send Kang to make sure that never happens. And instead, Kang plays matchmaker and gets her set up with Vision because that's what he wanted to do instead. And it reminds me a lot of Silver Surfer being the herald for Galactus. And Galactus is like a big villain sort of thing. But Silver Surfer often shows up and helps people, But
Kang is always out for Kang.
Yeah, but Immortus does it with a much more like villainous edge.
Well, I think Immortus does it in the way he thinks is best. So ultimately, it's going to be his determination of what he thinks is the best course of action for a thing, which you saw throughout the series. It was a rather accurate portrayal of Immortus in the end, as far as the machinations that he would perpetrate to execute something like this.
Did they actually verify that this was supposed to be Immortus? Like, was that in the credits or something?
No.
He
No,
was
they-
credited
people are saying.
as he who remains.
Okay.
So,
But the
Because I kind of
costume
feel like we'll probably
is-
get another Kang that actually calls himself Immortus, and
or
you know.
he who remains also is not dead at the end of this.
could be.
I mean, you don't know when the manipulations stop, truly.
Hmm.
And Immortus also has these bigger plans, usually, that involve sometimes faking his own death.
Very true.
Did he choose the name Kang, or like did that come later? What was his name when he was born?
Nathaniel Richards.
Mhm.
Okay, where did Kang come from?
Well, King was his second iteration, right? He did Ramatut first.
Yeah.
So basically, he discovered this time travel technology, traveled in the past to become a pharaoh, and set him up as a ruler in ancient Egypt.
Hmm.
The Fantastic Four thwarted that, and then he fled into the future. And as Ramatut encountered Doctor Doom, who wears armor, and thought, that's really cool, I should wear armor. And he reinvented himself as Kang the Conqueror and decided instead of going in the past to become a ruler, he would go into the future to become a ruler. And then mixed up in that is what? Scarlet Centurion. And then we know the end point is Immortus.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
Okay.
and also, like, he's, just to be clear, Nathaniel Richards from the get-go is from the future. Like, he's from like the 1600s.
Which is also accurate in this flashback. I mean, it's the
Or no. He's from
first
not the
century.
Yeah, he's
30th
from the
or
31st century.
Yeah.
He's from like hundreds of years in the future. But it's also a world where they didn't have the Dark Ages for some reason, because that was the thing that the authors were really focused on.
Basically, they're super advanced. I
Yeah,
mean, there was
super
no-
advanced.
There was
Okay.
no couple hundred years of dark period, so they were on the moon by the time the 18th or 19th century cranked around.
Hmm.
Okay.
And
So
and
anyway,
it-
he's from the future to
yeah.
begin with, is the
Yeah,
point.
yeah. I was just wondering where, like, was he born Kang, or did he? So he just was trying out other nicknames, and he was like, I'm not crazy about Ramatut. I'm going to try Kang and see if that sticks.
they ever had a naming moment where he goes, "Aha, Kang!" Like he looks over and there's a coffee can, Kang coffee.
Yeah.
He just like watches the Star Trek movie and it's like, that has a ring to it.
I had another question about Kang, and now it's slipped my mind.
Well, and it was interesting that they made him and He Who Remains the same character in the show. They're not the same character in the comics, obviously. Well, I say obviously, but they're separate characters. He Who Remains is basically like this dude from a previous universe who is still there and causes some problems. But he was like the director of the TVA in the comics.
Okay.
But it wasn't
Oh.
Kang.
Here's
Yeah.
a question I had. So, assuming that the multiverse is going to affect Spider-Man No Way Home and all that, how would someone jump from timeline to timeline, whether or not it's Peter going to face Doc Ock in the old Spider-Man universe, or whether Doc Ock gets pulled into the main Marvel universe? How does
We
that
know-
happen?
When we know Strange can hop universes or dimensions, he can hop dimensions. We've seen him hop dimensions because Dormammu exists in his own dimension.
Mhm.
We certainly know the TVA can hop between timelines with their technology. But I think maybe we'll see an event, which you often see a lot, like now the barriers between the dimensions and timelines are breaking down, that maybe things just start bleeding into timelines from other timelines, so things just show up.
Yeah. A lot of the time it's kind of accidental too. It'll be something like, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man universe, suddenly minions of Kang start showing up and he's investigating, and then they disappear through a mysterious portal and he follows them to try to find out what they're doing and ends up in another dimension.
Okay.
Like you've got sort of things like that can happen.
Or it could be a Kang version of orchestrating events, because this end game of Immortus, He Who Remains, talking about his plan and why he pruned the timeline and had this timeline, also plays into the comment earlier by the TVA about why the Avengers time travel was given a free pass, because it was necessary. And the idea that the Avengers are like the chief opponents of Kang, So the preservation of that timeline is also a timeline that keeps the Avengers intact to possibly be a force that opposes Kang.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's part of the breakdown of these realities is Kang trying to sow the seeds of undoing that opposition.
Okay.
It feels like a lot of chaos is going to
Uh-huh.
happen, and it's just going to be like, what how
This
did
is
I
from
get
this
here?
show, you're explaining too much to me.
I did like that. I mean, we guessed this not that this was a hard guess to make, but that the end of this series or season would have the multiverse occurring. So I'm glad that they did finally just have that happen. It's beyond the red line, no going back, they said. So I am
Mhm.
excited for all that chaos in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Brett Baumler sent in another super chat. Thank you. What are your theories on what He Who Remains sent Ravonna? I think he sent her the location of his past variant as Kang, which that reminded me of. I was questioning whether or not Ravonna knows who Kang is, or I keep saying Kang. I know it's He Who Remains, but
I don't think that she did, because when Miss Minute said this is what he thought you would need to read instead, or whatever she says, she's like, who?
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, but she also doesn't know about He Who Remains or Kang or any of the true history. I mean, she reiterates that earlier that she doesn't care, she doesn't know, she doesn't want to know. She just has to think there's a purpose to it all. I would have to rewatch it. Does that scene occur after He Who Remains says that the timelines are starting to split? Now we've moved beyond what I know, or does that happen before?
I can't remember.
I don't remember either.
I don't think so, but those scenes were kind of like going
Jumbled
back
up
and
a bit.
forth so much, so who knows?
I mean, it would still tie more into comics Ravonna if that was a manipulation from Kang that sends her to his side.
Her
Also, that would also
character,
make more sense about why she was put in a position of power at the TVA if there was a history between her version or that variant version and Kang / He Who Remains.
Well, and it's also, I mean, it would make sense also if it was another Kang, like if the other Kangs had become a possibility at that stage. It makes sense as a trick for them to get her away from the TVA, because my like gut feeling is that the TVA is going to kind of become Kang's like armies. Like each Kang will have their own TVA working for them, basically. And this is like a move to destabilize the TVA that belongs to the Kang that had been preventing all the other Kangs from happening.
Should we also talk about the broken statue in He Who Remains' castle?
Oh yeah, that
Yeah.
was a fun nod.
Oh,
What's
yes,
that
talk
about?
about that. But
So-
real quick, so do we have any idea what Kang may have sent Ravonna?
Oh, I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised. It was just, hook up with my past self. Just, head there, go talk to him, do whatever. Just connect.
Mhm.
I was so
maybe
sure
that's
that
why we see the ending that we do with Kang's statue.
Mm.
That sets
Oh.
in line the events that leads to the Kang statue at the end.
That's
the
a good
TVA.
point.
Yeah, because the TVA exists outside of the timeline, right? So it had
We're
to.
assuming.
So it's okay. Yeah, I said something early on about how, Sylvie sent him to a different TVA, but no, there's just the one.
Yeah, maybe it is only one. I don't know. It's hard
That
to
makes.
tell.
I mean, they said that it existed outside of the timeline. I assume they mean all the timelines, but
It's kind of hard to say exactly how that's going to play out, because some of the stuff that the TVA has said has been unreliable.
sure.
So
I did have it. Oh, that's a thought. What if he was sent back to an older version of the TVA? Meaning he's sent backwards in the TVA's timeline.
Oh, and they just
To
get
where-
reset every once in a while.
Or to where there's a Kang statue there. Maybe that's a broken Kang statue in the castle. And Kang was the one who started the TVA and then became He Who Remains and became enlightened. But the TVA was a Kang creation. Immortus or whoever took it over, destroyed that Kang statue, replaced them with this fake construct. Because they obviously can wipe people's memories. We don't know how long Mobius has been there. We don't know how long that agent has been there. we know that it's about been pruning timelines. So then Loki could show up before Loki was a concern for the TVA, because Loki only became a concern when stopping Kang became an issue. So they wouldn't know who he was at that point. He wouldn't be the thing that they're trying to snip out to ensure that Kangs don't happen.
Yeah.
So maybe that's it. It's all time travel. So we went back to an earlier version of the TVA, which, because we still haven't explained those rings, which they hit the rings again, the cup rings on the table, and talking about there's been other agents.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how many Mobius variants there have been working at the TVA.
They did. I mean, they hit the rings enough this episode where I was like, okay, maybe we were just looking way too into it, and it was simply just her looking at like what's left over from her friend, those rings, and regretting what she did. That's kind of what just like, oh, I miss him, I regret what I did. That's what I was chalking it up to. But I still hope maybe that there's more to it than that.
But that might explain why a construct of, these fake timekeepers were created, rather than He Who Remains just putting up statues of himself or being upfront about the fact that he was running it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to talk about that statue, but Brett sent in another super chat. Thank you. Cool Easter egg. I noticed Ravonna's past self in 2018 has the name Rebecca Terminate on her diploma, which is the name Ravonna took in the comics when living in the past with Kang. Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, to an extent, we'll just have to wait until season 2 to see what they do with her. But I think it'll be interesting if she ends up, teaming up with one of the Kangs, or if she ends up becoming kind of a good guy. I mean, either way, there's so many different things they could do with her character.
Maybe he sent her to Mobius.
Could be.
Or a version of Mobius.
Like in his actual life somewhere.
At his jet ski dealership. Goes up. Wow.
Yeah. Maybe. So did we talk about the statue and what it was an Easter egg of?
Well, my first thought was that it was an Easter egg to the fact that in the comics there were 4 timekeepers apparently, and one of them had been sent back into ancient Egypt, and so that's why there were only 3 whenever we see them. But there was secretly a 4th one that had been kind of like erased from the record, basically. But
I mean, he could have been telling the truth in the timekeeper lore, in that, because there has been, there's this Council of Cross-Time Kangs that exists in the comics, which is basically Kangs with uneasy truces trying to work together to manage themselves across.
Kind of Kang UN.
Yeah, everyone argues. It's a whole thing. But so maybe there were 4 Kangs that formed this council to create the TVA and to manage it. And, He Who Remains is all that's left of that. And recast the history of that. But the one that's demolished could be the actual Kang the Conqueror we're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually. The one who was cast out. The one who was deposed from the TVA.
I like this idea that she was sent back to find a version of Kang that has the potential to...
Oh, you mean Iron Lad? There you go, Ashton. There's your Iron Lad.
There you go.
He's teaming up with Kid Loki to find Kid Kang.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be potentially to find like basically a new dictator, someone else to sit in his spot?
Well, I think that it's more that the Kang that was at the end of time or whatever, that he recognized that if he did get destroyed, which it seemed like, I mean, I don't know if he could predict that or not. We don't know exactly how much of what he was saying was true. That they would need other like good Kangs to fight the bad Kangs that would be showing up, that would try to maybe destroy everything,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. And we still don't even know if the message was from the Kang that we saw in the episode or not. It could be from a different one.
Or it could be Miss Minutes just messing with everybody.
Yeah, let's talk about Miss Minutes. I put her in the thumbnail just for fun, but is she in the comics at all or anything like her, or was she just kind of a fun
No, she was.
We got a good jump scare out of her towards the beginning of the
kept saying
episode.
that she scared them. I didn't jump at that at all. I don't know why. Just
we were just
she's also
too far into it.
It's also a thing of like, what exactly is she? Like, is she a like computer program or something?
Is she an independent AI? Does she have a personality? Is she?
Yeah.
I mean,
I assume she knows who He Who Remains is.
Well, he made that little comment about, oh, she still calls me that.
Yeah.
It seems like they have a folksy little relationship going.
I'm going to say she's Mephisto.
She's the Fantastic Four.
I said
maybe she's
beginning.
Ultron. In the far future, Kang has completely like made Ultron like his servant, and
it's an Ultron variant.
Yeah,
that would be interesting.
Southern accent, just really likes time. That's it.
At the end of time, you want folksy.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about Sylvie. What did you guys think of how her story kind of ended and all this? And where do you think, what do you think we're going to see from her in the next season?
Or in movies if she pops up elsewhere.
Yeah. Yes.
I think it'll be really interesting to see.
Right?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, she's still pretty much she's still in that castle. She still is like her hands on the potential controls that he had in that position, still guarded by Eliath. So there's still that blocking anyone attempting to get to her outside of using that time pad.
Yeah, she's got like the best of the best time pads.
But you'd think that she wouldn't stay there. I mean, her goal was to bring the TVA down, or was it to just kill whoever was in charge of it? But I don't think she's going to stay in that castle.
I feel like she would just, that whole time she was just seeing red, and like she was like, all this time I've been trying to find out who's behind the TVA and like who's behind everything, and she just killed him, and then she like doesn't know what to do next.
Yeah, I mean, the implication, she's been doing this for thousands of years on the run,
right?
And with this singular focus. I mean, she said she's older than Loki, or the Loki we know at one point, and he's over 1,000 years old. So she's been focused on revenge for quite a while. I can't imagine in a couple of minutes of, a philosophical discussion, it's going to turn that rage off completely when your goal's right in front of you.
Yeah.
The only singular purpose you've had since you were a child.
Oh yeah, I bought
away from
that.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think that that's going to be the most interesting thing, is seeing what, like, because after she stabs him, all that we see her do is just kind of sit down on the floor. That's all we've seen her do afterwards. I think it'll be interesting to see her do more now that her like defining goal is gone. Like,
and
what does she do now?
Made her alone again. She went from being alone on the run to now being alone again. The one connection she had made with herself, essentially, she broke that, and now she's alone at the end of time.
Speaking of her being alone, though, I think that maybe her next step will be leaving the castle, going back into the void, and then she has a Tim pad, and then she could grab Kid Loki and Alligator Loki and leave.
That's true.
In the Thanos copter.
Yeah. But maybe that's a way for like Kid Loki and those characters to end up continuing to be part of the story.
Do you expect her to show up in other things outside of Loki? I guess I'm thinking that she won't appear again until season 2. And I kind of feel the same way about Loki and all the other Lokis. And I'm not expecting the TVA to pop into maybe Ant-Man, but for the most part,
I think I would think the bigger shot would be Doctor Strange, because if you're going to go weird and bring in these elements and go into different dimensions or pull in all of that, I think that would be the one that you did. It's not going to be Spider-Man.
And that was supposed to come out this year, right?
Well, it's going to come out early 20.
It was originally supposed to come out before Spider-Man. But now Spider-Man comes out in December, and March is Doctor Strange. So it comes out pretty close.
But it'll probably be
Seems
before
odd.
Loki season 2.
Yeah.
I would presume that Loki season 2 is going to roll out same time period, which would put it after Doctor Strange and well before Quantumania. I mean, if you're looking at a year schedule between seasons, that times out nicely, so you could have whatever happens in Doctor Strange roll into it. And also, are we going to go ahead and assume that what happened in the tag on WandaVision is because of the timelines breaking down, that suddenly there's contacts from her children that she hears?
Could be.
Mm.
I like
Yeah.
that.
So
That
sort
makes
of
sense.
threading that through as well, because that now logically makes sense if everything's breaking down, that there's a reality where those kids are still there and she can
Yeah.
go.
I'm just really excited to see more of Wanda.
Wheels within wheels.
Which
Yeah.
she'll be in Doctor Strange, so that's next. That's March.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Spider-Man will be in it too.
In Doctor Strange?
Uh-huh.
Oh wow. I knew Doctor Strange would be in Spider-Man, right? Or
Yes.
was that the other way? Or they
Well, the
like, doubling
Spider-Man
up?
was in the Doctor Strange poster that they released months ago.
And
Oh,
the Lego
cool.
set.
Well, yeah, but I thought the Lego set was for Spider-Man.
Yes, but it's all tied together. It's one.
This
one.
is
Yeah.
so confusing, and we're not even talking about time travel now.
Hold on, I made an animated video. There's a song.
Thurl, thanks for the super chat. In some version, Kang's lover is the Mantis. Like in Spider-Ham universe, it's Kangaroo the Conqueror versus Enchantress, Gator Loki, Doctor Strange.
Enchantress.
Doctor Strange. Please.
That's a good one.
Oh, Doctor Strange?
Yes, it's
Yeah.
Doctor Strange.
Oh, I get it.
And Enchantress.
Enchantress.
She's a cat.
Are those all real?
Yes, that's in the Spider-Ham universe.
Oh
which
my
was-
god.
Yeah. Children's books, a children's line in the was spun off of Marvel Tales. Is that what the backup story was? I think that had Spider-Ham for a bit, and then they made it part of their Star line of kids comics. That had the Muppet Babies comic book, and Wally the Wizard, I think, was one of the ones that was in that line. But yeah, so everything was a pun. It was how to make an animal out of a character in the Marvel universe.
What do you think the chances are that Spider-Ham shows up in the MCU?
I mean, we've seen Throg now, so
Mm.
We
Sure.
haven't
Who
seen
knows?
Throg. We haven't seen Throg, Ashton. We've seen Frog Thor.
oh, was that Thor turned into the frog?
Two separate characters.
Okay.
Which they did say
I've
that
lost
Chris
this battle
Hemsworth-
already, but it's fine.
Well, yeah, no, I know that they're two separate. We had talked about how they're two separate characters in a previous one, but
The
so
general
that
public has
was
already determined that the collapse of the names is funnier and easier to remember.
Do we know that was actually Thor though in the jar? Not.
Yes, because it's also the new lines they recorded with Chris Hemsworth.
I was gonna
that's
say,
true,
I
yeah.
believe they had Chris Hemsworth
I did read
voice.
that. I guess I forgot that there were
Mjolnir.
two different characters, Throg and Thor, that's been turned into a frog.
Yes.
Yeah, because Loki
Loki.
turned him into a frog because Loki is Loki, and then
Yeah.
while he was a frog, he befriended another frog in Central Park who turned out to also be a human that had been turned into a frog for some
Because
reason.
it happens.
Because that happens to people. And then he instilled a sense of heroism and chivalry into the other frog. And so then when he eventually went away and became Thor again, that frog decided to be a hero.
Oh,
He got a
that's
tiny little hammer.
Mhm.
Did he have
I
to be
like
worthy to wield it, or was it
Oh,
just
yeah.
a hammer?
Yeah, and he had to
No,
talk in
you just
ye
have to be
old
okay.
language too.
It wasn't
Had to.
quite as sticky as Thor's. He says you have to be okay to wield it.
I think to circle back to the beginning, Ken would fight variant Kens over whether or not it's Throg or Frog Thor.
And whether that matters.
Yeah.
Well, that's the enlightened one at the end because it really doesn't matter. Shouldn't be fighting about this.
That's
That would be
that's going to be
to decide.
your time loop that you just keep going
Yeah.
into.
Yeah.
When they put you in time prison.
It's just Ashton coming out and going, "It's Throg."
No, no.
They're two separate characters.
Brian brought up a while ago about the What If series, basically getting, or that's going to be a bunch of stories that are branching off of the idea of the multiverse that just aren't getting movies. Yeah, aren't getting the movie treatment.
Yeah, I mean, because we saw a Zombies one, which was a big Marvel Comics run for a bit when everyone was fascinated with zombies. So I think, yeah, that's an easy way for them to explore. It's sort of have their cake and eat it too when it comes to continuity, and go, yeah, well, let's tell this story. Let's go ahead and say it, but it's a what if. It's like what DC Comics would do with their Elseworlds tales. It's like, this is a really cool story we want to tell, and we want to tell it. It's like Visions. I mean, it's a Star Wars Visions. It's like, this is cool. We want to tell it, but it's not in our normal continuity. So it's a what if story now. And we get to have fun with it.
I tried to compare Visions to the what if story, and Alex got mad. He was like, it's not the same.
Oh, is it the Throg of comparisons?
Probably.
I think it was because the what if series is like established characters just kind of being flipped around. Visions is like all new stuff, new stories.
I mean, a lot of the time, the what if, at least if they're going the same route that the comics did, the what if stories are mostly just like really fun, like just off the wall ideas of like,
what if
like one of them was like
Herald of Galactus.
Yeah, or like what if the Green Goblin got the Infinity Gauntlet? You know, like things like that. And it's just
what if
kind
Spider-Man
of like
didn't get a double shot that day? He's tired through the whole issue.
Yeah.
I mean, or like the way that they've established the multiverse, it's like these all could. It's an infinite universe.
You saw them at the portal. I mean, basically,
could all exist.
At the end, when you saw that branching timeline, that's what if. You saw what if being created right there at the end of the episode.
Yeah, and so I think that it's mostly going to be. I mean, it could end up being kind of exposition for you know, the stuff that's going to come later in the you know, in the multiverse stuff. I mean, we might learn a little bit more about how the multiverse works, maybe.
We could also see maybe Peggy Carter's Captain Britain dropping into a future movie.
I would love for Captain Britain to become part of the MCU.
Collapse could happen, like this big multiverse war. Could you have the equivalent of the end of Avengers Endgame happening with variants of all these characters in a big, massive melee?
Is she called Captain Britain in the comics?
There's a character in the comics called Captain Britain.
But it just makes sense if you're going to have a Captain America, that maybe that's where they'll weave in Captain Britain as the reference.
Is there a cup of tea on his shield?
They're like, we don't want the flag on there. Nope.
No, he's actually a really interesting character. He has a lot of like magic stuff.
And he's also tied to the multiverse. There is a whole like range of Captain Britons across the multiverse who keep track of each other.
Yeah, they have a multiversal UN sort of thing too.
The thing is, if you throw a stone anywhere in this discussion, you're going to hit a multiverse or a variant.
Sure. I hadn't thought that potentially what if could be slightly educational, as in like maybe instead of each episode just being completely standalone. There are some Star Wars comics that do this where technically each issue is its own story, but it's like someone telling that story, and that person is in all 5 issues and they kind of have an arc. So it would be interesting to see, because like, is it the Watcher?
The Watcher,
right? So if he introduces all of them, he could basically be giving newbies a tutorial on how the multiverse works.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's kind of like the Crypt Keeper,
right?
In Tales from the Crypt, in that, he's going to be your through line throughout the entire show, and could potentially, I'm curious to see what the opening titles is for the show. Like, how are they going to set the premise up? Because I think that's going to be a great tutorial for Marvel moving forward, is how, for an audience who's sitting down to what if, how do you explain the multiverse in a quick, easy way that gets you into. And then here's one of our tales.
Or maybe Sylvie at the end of time decides to become the god of stories, and now she's the one telling these stories.
Or she shaved her head and she's the watcher.
That could be one of the episodes.
We can mention any theory right now, and in some version of the multiverse, it's happened. So the reveal happened at the end of WandaVision. That happened.
I wouldn't be surprised if we get the What If series and there's no explanation. It's just the episodes come out and they don't even mention the multiverse.
Yeah. Be like, what? I mean,
that's kind of what I assumed it would be.
Yeah.
What if the Inhumans movie had been good and we actually had Inhumans in the MCU story still?
What if you were still following this?
Batman is my dad. Thanks for the super chat. We touched on this earlier, but this feels like a good way to wrap it up. Just for the future, could the multiverse, I think, war be like the big bad, like Thanos was? And Ashton, you've talked about how, and I like that idea that instead of a big villain coming in, it's just, this terrible event that does have lots of villains, but.
Well, and we might very well end up with a actual, like, main Kang that's a villain. You know, like, you could have the actual Kang the Conqueror who's, like, actually subjugated a bunch of other Kangs or something, and he ends up being kind of the focal point. But I think that the focus will probably be more on, like, the actual event.
Or the chaos that's being caused by this breakdown. It seems like Doctor Strange, most of all, would be the one to address, everything's going wrong. Everything's breaking down. You know, the Ancient One's description in Endgame was very much about guarding the timeline and not having these divergences, and that being the Sorcerer Supreme's, one of their main purposes in the world. And if all this thing is going wrong, then Doctor Strange has some work to do.
I've been really loving the memes about exactly that, of just Doctor Strange watching Loki or watching WandaVision and being like, "Oh God." Someone photoshopped like Doctor Strange's cape and everything onto Michael Scott doing like the.
I think my favorite is the Ben Affleck one where he's just standing out in the street with a cigarette and he's like. He's just got this like pained look on his face.
There's one I saw of like he's walking home to his front door, but behind the door are like his family, and they're all holding knives. And it's like Loki, Wanda, so and so.
Although somebody saved me the time because I was going to do this. Please save me the trouble of putting on He Who Remains his head behind that desk Ted Lasso's face. Because I like the idea of a reveal of Ted Lasso being the one who remained at the end.
Well, I'd let him go. I'd be like, all right, I trust you. See ya.
Yeah. He's the only one left with a heart of gold.
He's the only one worthy to run the TVA. If you say it's necessary, Ted, it must be.
You just got to believe.
It's slap that sign on the way out of my door. Well, thank you for joining us, Ken. Where can people find you online and follow you?
At Ken Plume on Twitter. Patreon.com/Ken Plume has all the bit of a chats that I've done. Got a couple new ones, including with Bobby Moynihan, which we talk a lot about his Star Wars collection.
Nice.
So there's a lot of fun conversation with that. And then I've been streaming on Twitch when I need to take a break from doing work. So that's Ken Plume Twitch, which we've just been playing Fortnite poorly and talking about things. Hide. That's the only strategy, is hide. Let everyone else fight.
No, that's what I do every time in any one of those battle royales.
Yeah, no, let them take each other out like Kangs. They can take each other out, and then you be the one who remains, and you win.
I can kill one person. I can kill the last person. I'm not going to kill 8 people.
Yeah. So you're saying maybe the Kang in this episode just hid in a bush for like centuries?
Yeah. No, he knows how to play the game of Kangs.
Ashton, where can people follow you?
I'm on Twitch at Yeti Boatman. I play games on there every once in a while. That's pretty much it. I'm on Twitter also, but I never use it.
Ashton, now I feel like we should play games together just so you didn't sound so alone in that statement. Want to go hide in bushes with me?
Yeah.
That's what we used to do when we played PUBG. Like 4 of us just huddled in bushes. Like we're just gonna wait this out.
I was gonna say I nearly won a game of PUBG by hiding in a bathtub.
Just gonna wait for this to all blow over.
We'll all reconvene and wear our Loki outfits in Fortnite, and we'll go hide and see if we can survive.
Molly, where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Molly Damon. Instagram is Mollymander. I'm on Star Wars Explained, talking Star Wars stuff. And if you're a fan of the Schmodown, you can catch me on A Certain Point of View.
And you can subscribe to Star Wars Explained. We're going to be talking about the Bad Batch tomorrow and doing this for episode 12. But before we go, we got one more super chat from Batman is my dad. Could X-Men or the Fantastic Four be introduced in What If?
They could. I kind of hope that they don't, just because I feel like they'll need more fanfare. But I mean, they could. Yeah. It's possible that you might just get like a Wolverine or somebody pop up. Yeah. You know,
I wouldn't be surprised if maybe they start seeding in some of those characters or mentions or names in there. I'd be very happy. Fantastic Four appeared.
Yeah,
I agree with Ashton. It's like I wouldn't want that to be the first MCU inclusion of the X-Men. I don't know. Feels a little bit.
If I had the ability to,
our waiter is Wolverine. What?
If I had the ability to guarantee that one character that's not in MCU yet would get a good treatment, I would want it to be Doctor Doom. Please, make it be a good Doctor Doom.
Fingers crossed. I hope so. But the multiverse, I think, helps with that, because you can do away with having to do all kinds of backstory and just have them appear in their fully fleshed out form and be a threat. And then them have to figure out who he is.
Yeah. Agreed.
We still have that Wakanda series coming up, and if you're going to introduce Latveria, that's it.
I mean, maybe Latveria ends up being a Sokovia that wasn't destroyed.
We could have our whole our own What If series.
What if this episode never ended? What if we just kept talking about all these things?
Saying what if?
You can keep doing that while I hit the outro music.
What if?